I'm big about being a part of something that's bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And that's honestly part of my spiritual care practices. So
Yeah.
not it sounds hokey cheesy, whatever to say, okay, Taylor Swift and the Barbie movie are part of my spiritual care practices, but like absolutely
Yeah.
something that draws you into joy and draws
Yeah.
you to like your most ridiculous singing self and just
Yeah.
feeling that what you call lifiness. And I think really that is the entire purpose of why we're here on earth in the first place, is to
Mm-hmm.
constantly be moving towards
Mm-hmm.
being the fullest, most joyful, most exuberant and lively versions of ourselves we can possibly be.
Do you remember what it feels like to be comfortable in your own skin? Not just confident, but also pain-free, relaxed, healthy, and carefree? Think about the most robust version of your own childhood body. This is what lifiness feels like: a joyful spirit and a vibrant physical state of being. I'm your guide, Professor Sarah, storyteller, teacher, and wellness enthusiast. Reach into the vitality of your own girlhood to supercharge your grown-up life. Hey there, listener, and welcome to the Lifiness Podcast. Today, I'm talking to an old childhood friend. I haven't seen her in many, many years. She lives in Seattle, so we spoke virtually over Zoom. Her name is Melissa Bortnick, and we're going to talk today about her experience working at Harborview Medical Center. We're going to talk about coping with death and loss, but from maybe a little bit different perspective. I recently have been meditating on or contemplating the idea of death, not in a morbid way, but just kind of the Buddhist practice way of celebrating life by thinking about death, by accepting it. It's a really rewarding experience to be able to embrace the idea of your own death. Death is such a natural part of life, and it's certainly a natural part of Melissa's everyday job. She wants to show people that it's not something to be avoided. So we spoke about death, loss, how close she is to people who have lost loved ones or people who are about to die. There are many ways to find joy in life, even after experiencing loss. And enjoying life because of mortality, because of death. Embracing it that much more. So, Melissa is a 47-year-old mother of 3 teenage kids. She earned her Master of Divinity from Seattle Pacific Seminary and her undergraduate degrees in biology and chemistry. So, she kind of has that balance of spiritual and scientific that we love on this show. I have known Melissa since I was, I think 13. Her family moved to our town when I was like in 7th or 8th grade, and then they moved away before she finished high school. So we spent a couple years hanging out and playing together and growing up together back in Tallahassee. But then her family moved away, and I have not talked to her since. I haven't seen her face to face since we were probably 16, 17 years old. But today she's going to offer some really valuable insights. So without further ado, welcome Melissa Bortnick to Lifiness. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. First of all, Melissa, this is great.
This
I
is
know
awesome.
you're taking time out of your busy schedule, and it sounds like you have a really busy life.
I'm doing quite a bit right now. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like this whole program that you're doing is very academic in nature, very intellectual.
It is. And that kind of surprises some people, I think, who there are a lot of chaplaincy roles, even pastoral roles that are pretty much volunteer led, volunteer sustained. But the work
Mhm.
that I'm doing is very, very academically rigorous, which suits me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I make friends with all my books. Yeah.
Cool. Um, I want to talk about what clinical spiritual care is. So right now, you're a clinical spiritual resident, right? At
Right.
Harborview. Can you tell listeners a little bit about your job, and what that even means, clinical spiritual care.
Sure. So clinical refers to being in the medical setting,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to chaplaincy in a more like a parish setting inside of a church. Some people work as pastors in a church, and some
Right.
people work in chaplain settings like in jails or in military settings, for example. But clinical spiritual care refers to being in a medical setting. And so Harborview Medical Center, downtown Seattle, is the level 1 trauma center here on the East Coast. So Harborview specifically gets the worst of the worst cases. We have emergency psychiatry services. We have folks coming in from Alaska who've been life flighted to us, folks from
Mm-hmm.
California coming in. So a level 1 trauma center, we see the stabbings, the gunshots, the violence, the sexual assaults, things that can't be treated best at maybe like smaller medical institutions. So chaplaincy in a level 1 trauma center is very unique in the way that we're attending and coming alongside people who are coming in really a lot of folks from the emergency department who are in shock. Those immediate stages of this horrible thing just happened. The trauma is very long
Mm-hmm.
connected. And then there's people who are brought in for longer term stays. I happen to work on the pediatric unit, the burn unit, trauma recovery unit. And there are situations there when a chaplain is called in that are unlike any other institution, like a cancer care institution. That's not primarily what we do center, or things like Seattle Children's Hospital, where there's primarily care for pediatric patients.
Right.
But if they're pediatric patients at my hospital, then the level of care is more critical.
Right. Wow. How did you get into this line of work?
From high school teaching, then it happened that my family moved to the state of Washington from
Mm-hmm.
Illinois, and a job opened up at my local church. So I'd always attended the United Methodist Church. And when a job opened up for a youth minister, I was like, oh, hey, I've been a high school teacher. I love young people, I love families. And so I worked there as a children's, youth, and family minister for quite a while. And while I was in that role was when I found the sort of pastoral calling that I had never really identified before. I think it was always inside of me, but I could never quite articulate it. And other
Right.
people started really affirming those gifts in me. Like, I think you're called to be a pastor. And I dismissed that. I thought that's not really what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And then one thing led to another, and I found myself in seminary
Yeah.
after all of the thoughts of like, I'm too old for this. I have
Right.
3 kids now. I can't go back and get my master's degree. It's going to be too hard.
Right.
All that stuff, all those I can'ts,
Mm.
ridiculous. And I spend a lot of time now talking people out of their I can'ts. I guess you can.
Mm-hmm.
If I did it, you can do it too. So
Yeah.
I went back to school, got my Master of Divinity, and started pursuing options in the line of pastoral work. And what I found was this opportunity for CPE, which stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. These are programs mostly in hospitals, in many different places, mostly larger hospitals, where chaplains are trained to do their work. And I
Right.
thought, wow, I really want to do pastoral work, but maybe not necessarily in a church parish setting where
Right.
I would be preaching every Sunday and leading Bible studies and things like that, which I also love, but wanted
Mm-hmm.
to do something else in the lines of pastoral care and conversations with people. And so I got into this hospital clinical care work, not accidentally, but really not knowing exactly what I was getting myself into.
Right.
And from day one, I just had this feeling of like overwhelming, wow, I didn't know this was here. This is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Caring for patients at the bedside who are in their most vulnerable moments of their life, but also the families who
Yeah.
are there visiting them, and the staff who are um, stationed in the hospital longer. The patients and families come and go, but the staff, they turn over like any other institution. But the doctors and nurses and other
Mm-hmm.
parts of the care team that are there, those are the folks who I also care for as a chaplain.
Yeah, I bet.
And so it's just such a unique environment to do pastoral work.
Hmm.
Extends so far beyond religious care into
Yeah.
that realm of spiritual um, nourishment, spiritual insight, spiritual healing.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people are not. I wasn't aware of this. Like, I have a vague memory when my son was born of a priest coming in while I was already in labor just to talk. I think my husband at the time had him come in. I was like, why is this guy here? And he was comforting for sure, but I don't think most people know the extent of work, the scope of work that needs to be done. I mean, now that I think about it, like I can imagine there's a lot of work for all different kinds of faith and different kinds of support.
Yeah, it's a job. A lot of people, I think, hear the word chaplain and go right away to this Christian
Hmm.
uh, idea of maybe a priest or a Protestant minister, pastor coming in and
Hmm.
saying some prayers with them and leaving or something. But chaplaincy is so much more than that.
Yeah.
I'm constantly working with um, cultural mediators, interpreters. I'm working with social workers, the police.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm in a room, a lot of times there's incarcerated patients who are needing medical care.
Right.
And so I'm working alongside folks from so many different disciplines, not just medical, but so many people from our social care disciplines in the
Hmm.
community. And reaching out to in a public hospital, it is certainly not, like, I can't stress that enough. It's certainly not just a Christian occupation.
Right.
This is something that reaches far beyond any one faith system.
Yeah.
And definitely every person, I think, has a spirit which needs to be cared for,
Hmm.
whether or not they choose to have religion be a part of their spirituality or not. Spiritual care is so ingrained in medical care.
Right.
And so it's that holistic idea of treating people. You're treating their bodies, but are we also caring for their minds and their spirits at the same time? All
Right.
those things go together.
Yeah, it's like that mysterious place that's even goes deeper and wider than mental health support. It's more than that. So sometimes where maybe a psychiatrist or a licensed therapist can't go, you might be able to help.
Absolutely. And there's a lot on the Venn diagram of this interdisciplinary work, right? There's a lot of people who come together to help any one given individual. And so
Hmm.
I document in the electronic medical records, just like your cardiologist or one would. We
Yeah.
write to each other, and all the folks as part of the clinical care team, all of the folks read each other's notes and try
Hmm.
to provide our own sort of like niche benefits from our
Hmm.
perspectives of what can be added to that. And so a lot of times that chaplain work, spiritual care work adds to the work of the psych work that's out there.
I bet. Yeah, it gives you a better picture of the patient if you have all those notes in there. That's brilliant. I hadn't thought of that. Uh,
Absolutely.
so you said Harborview, where you work, was an inspiration for the show Grey's Anatomy. Did you ever
For
watch that show? I'm not a hospital drama kind of person, but did you ever watch that or think about?
I've seen a few episodes of it. My daughters have, I think, watched every single episode from day one and have,
Wow.
the chronological, like the timeline of Meredith Grey's life and all this
Uh-huh.
memorized. But there are people, patients who come to visit and they're like, is this where the show is filmed? No, this is not actually where it's filmed, but supposedly in that show, it is a large hospital located in Seattle, which
Yeah.
would be us. So
Yeah, that would be you. So, in working with these patients, like these serious diseases, maybe end of life choices and things like that, has it like impacted your understanding of kind of the brevity of life, of mortality? Do you think about it more and how does it impact your outlook?
yeah, I think life is so brief.
Mhm.
Um, the ways that we choose to interact with each other
Yeah.
can shift and change throughout our lifetimes. I think it's impossible to work in a trauma center like this and see death daily. Um,
Mhm.
it is just a part of touching dead bodies or nearly dead people. it's just part of my work. It's just another day. And that teaches me that death is a very natural, very normal part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that idea that so many people come to death or approach death with this idea of that it's not normal, it's somehow something apart from life, something that they've almost never considered or never wanted to consider, maybe something they've even dismissed, is to me strange. So, a big part of what I see my role is in spiritual care is to help people normalize the ideas of death and dying, is of approaching end of life or even facing a sudden traumatic accident, knowing that was possible all along. There's
Right.
never any promises ever
Mm-hmm.
that we are going to wake up and have another day.
Right.
Um, and so many of us, we can't live our life in a constant state of fear, saying, oh my gosh, I don't want to drive my car because I could be in an accident. I don't want to get on that airplane because I could crash. We
Mm-hmm.
can't live with that perspective, but instead live from the perspective of, I should go get in the car. I should go on the plane. I should go do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
To live life to its fullest and embrace opportunities because we might not see tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think we live with it, with this idea that it's our right to have another day, but that was never a promise. That was never, that wasn't in the deal. And it's hard for us when we work from this template of like, well, I deserve this and I deserve that and I earn this and I earn that and I can control this, when in reality you can't control most things. Is there a specific case that you can share with me or share with us that kind of changed your perspective maybe early on, or shifted something, that a story you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories, so many examples. I think the very first thing that popped into my head was something that happened to me very early in my chaplaincy training. We do both day shifts and night shifts as interns, and then from an
Mm-hmm.
intern you move up to be a resident. From a resident you can move up to be a fellow. And so very early on in my, it was maybe one of my first night shifts. And so on a night shift, you're a solo chaplain in the hospital for the night. And I was called down to the emergency room, and there was a young guy. He's probably like 26 years old, and he'd been in a motorcycle accident. And I arrived with his body in the room, and they were pretty sure he wasn't going to survive, but hadn't yet quite done brain death testing at the moment. And I stood there with him, not knowing if he could hear me or not knowing really if he could feel
Mm-hmm.
anything. It was very fresh. And soon his mom came in, and there was a younger girl with him who I thought at the time was his sister. And just the shock and grief of seeing his body in that moment of like, here is your loved one.
Yeah.
And the mom stepped out of the room, and I was with the girl, and it turns out she was his fiance,
Oh God.
and they were scheduled to get on a flight the very next day to go to their wedding in Hawaii. And
You're
I
Oh my
sat there with
gosh.
her. Yeah, just my heart just completely sunk. And as a fresh chaplain, never seeing a body literally lifted up off the pavement like this,
Mm-hmm.
bloody and ripped up before, having never been in a room with someone who is just pouring their heart out, laying over him, just screaming and crying. You have no other choice as a chaplain. There's nothing you can say. There's
Mm-hmm.
no way to take away the pain. There's no way to take away the grief. That's not what's even needed. That's not at all what's helpful. The only
Mm-hmm.
thing that is helpful is to be with that person in
Mm-hmm.
that moment and say, this is real. This is horrible. And this is actually happening.
Yeah.
And I can remember her after I was with her for probably a couple of hours, and the medical team came in and out, and they did officially say that he wasn't going to survive and that he was dead at that time.
Oh my gosh.
And I can just remember her kind of having this moment of clarity where she just said to me, everything up till now has been such a gift. And
Oh, she said that? That's amazing. Wow.
she taught me to have this perspective, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and open my eyes to, yes, there are tragedies. Yes, there are things that are unexplainably horrific,
Mm-hmm.
unexpected. And that doesn't wipe away that every moment up until that point, every moment of the relationship could have been an absolute gift.
Wow. She totally flipped that.
Yeah. And that idea of, she handed me her insight was a gift to me,
Mm-hmm.
as are all of the stories that I've received from patients. I've received them as gifts. These moments of just knowing that every single thing that you see that seems so daily, so mundane,
Mm-hmm.
monotonous, the sun shining, the wind blowing through the trees, all of that is a gift
Mm-hmm.
that can be appreciated, just the smallest things. And when we magnify those things, that's what we are still holding on to eventually when a life is gone.
That makes me think of that TED speaker. I can't remember her name right now, but the death doula TED speaker who recently went viral. And she talks about the end, what she would, I mean, she's a young woman, but she talks about just dealing with this over and over again, how she would want to be on her deathbed, if possible. And she talks about the little tiniest things, about just biting into a fried plantain. She's like, I want to remember that. And I want all the little things. Or like when I first learned to tie my shoes, that feeling, and just drawing out that experience of like, hey, all these beautiful things that are happening to all of you all the time, that is the gift of life. So I bet for you, I don't know, it's almost like you get to see the world through a new prism by dealing with this every day. But at the same time, I do wonder if it takes a toll on you, or if you have a certain level of self-care that you have to practice to take care of yourself.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's not a caregiver of any kind that I've ever met who doesn't have some grief or tragedy or something like that stick to them, right? And I think that's one of the things that I've learned in my past several years of church ministry and working with other people that I've brought to chaplaincy with me, is learning that other people's lives, other people's stories are not mine to hold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my personal theology, I believe that God has a life for each individual,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, gifts and skills and worries and cares that are all unique to us and in our spirits. And for me to enter into someone else's grief and then take that on is actually not what God is calling me to do. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not calling to hold their grief. I'm calling to walk alongside someone for moments, whether that's days or weeks or months or something, but eventually to give it back. And so when I go home at the end of the day, it's constantly something I'm needing to remind myself, like, that is work. And as seriously as I take it and as reverently as I take it, if people have died that day, the conversations I've had with folks, the grief, the pains, those stay at the hospital because I
Mm-hmm.
cannot take them home with me.
Yeah.
It's not good for me if I do that. And so, yeah, when I leave, I have some care practices. Like physically, I wash my hands. I'm very into the ideas of washing and cleansing, and even coming back to some baptismal ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and then I reorient my senses. I get back into the car and I turn on a song on the radio and just rock out, like Aerosmith is
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorites or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hearing something different than like the beeps and the noises from the hospital. I try to get smells to be different. I try to eat something specific. So I just reorient all of my senses away from work
Yeah.
into my home life so that I can come home and not forget my patients, but not have the same texture of,
Right.
so that I can be joyful and playful and laugh with my kids
Mm-hmm.
at home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to be the sad mom whose child just died. I was probably with her, but I know
Hmm.
I am not her.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of skill and time and practice and intention to
Hmm.
separate myself from my work.
And
Um,
boundaries. It sounds like you're doing some good boundary setting there.
Absolutely. And not only boundary setting for myself, but part of my role as a chaplain then is to talk to the other people on the care team about that and ask them, wow, that code blue we just had, that was really hard. This patient you've been caring for the past 20 days just died. Uh, how are you going to care for yourself? So I spent a lot of time talking with other social workers, other nurses, especially the bedside nurses, who have built these emotional, good, healthy attachments with the patients and families they're caring for. And the outcomes are not always what people were hoping for, what they expected.
Hmm.
They have to go home to their own families too
Yeah.
and embrace and live and sometimes dedicate our days for runs at night. Sometimes I'll come home and I'll say, all right, this next mile, this is for you, so and so. Maybe someone whose hand I was holding earlier that day, who took their last breath.
Hmm.
I just say, this one's for you.
Yeah. So, as a sideline, but part of this self-care discussion, I noticed you went to a Taylor Swift concert recently.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I was just thinking, did you sing a song for some of your patients? Did you?
Yes.
How was it? Was it great?
Yeah. So I have three teenage kids, and my oldest two daughters really wanted to go to the Taylor Swift concert. So I am not necessarily a person who enjoys large crowds
Yeah.
or loud noises or anything like that. But I wanted to be there with them. Yeah. Taylor Swift. I'm not really a Swiftie, but I might be now. I don't know. She
I'm
was
a
amazing.
I'm a
So,
big
so
fan,
cool.
secretly a big fan. I was so jealous when I saw your post. That's wonderful.
Well, and from where we were sitting, it just so happened that when I looked out over the stadium walls, I could see Harborview Medical Center and the line of windows. I could have named for you who was in those rooms. And I
Wow.
was looking up there and I was like, wow, it just so happened. Like if we'd been sitting on the other side of the stadium, I wouldn't have seen it, right?
Yeah.
But it almost gave me chills to be sitting right there in the stadium. And I looked out and I was like, that's so and so and so and so's window. And I was like, can you hear the concert? This is so great. This one's for you. And
Oh,
so
that's wonderful.
I do. I find myself a lot of the time living and celebrating and just embracing moments, um,
Hmm.
and dedicating it to the memory of someone else. Like not myself not enjoying it, but also being like, this is so amazing. Share it with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then tonight I had a very Taylor weekend. And then tonight I'm going to Barbie. I painted my nails.
Yay! That's so fun. Did you pick
Yeah.
out what you're gonna wear? Do you
Yeah.
have an outfit?
Yeah, I have some like pink thing I'm gonna put on.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we were supposed to see it yesterday, but just time got away from us. So I want to dress up. I want to go out and make a
Yeah.
big deal of it. So that's fun. Are you going with your girls?
It's so fun. Yeah, we're all gonna go. And just for me, I'm big about being a part of something that's bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And that's honestly part of my spiritual care practices. So
Yeah.
not it sounds hokey cheesy, whatever to say, okay, Taylor Swift and the Barbie movie are part of my spiritual care practices, but like absolutely
Yeah.
something that draws you into joy and draws
Yeah.
you to like your most ridiculous singing self and just
Yeah.
feeling that what you call lifiness.
Yeah, that's Barbie is absolutely that. Yeah, some of those messages. I mean, I haven't even seen it yet, but I love good-natured humor, and I can tell it's going to be that.
Absolutely.
But
That for
that's
sure.
fun. So
Yeah.
speaking of, we're talking a lot about existential stuff, and I know that you've been going through this program, through this training and education. Has any of this work led to any like philosophical changes or transitions in the way that you think about life and death and the nature of death?
Yeah. Gosh. Yes. So how to put all of that into words is the question, right?
Yeah.
When I meet so many different people, one of the beautiful things about being particularly at Harborview is
Hmm.
that there are so many languages, so many cultures
Hmm.
represented in that um, clinical setting,
Yeah.
that I have an opportunity to be not only in my own church setting where the people I'm attending worship with are like of my same faith. Mostly we speak the same spoken language. We come from the same culture.
Right.
When I am in a chaplain setting, I'm interacting with people whose views and perspectives on so many different things are not necessarily the same as my own. And although I feel I am very rooted in my own ideas, my own perspectives of why and how I think about things, I'm constantly being introduced to new ways of seeing and new ways of thinking, new ways
Hmm.
of explaining, new ways of living into situations. And when I'm with someone, for example, who has celebrated life through a different faith tradition, I've just learned that there's no one right way
Yeah.
to to grieve. There's
Right.
no one right way to celebrate. One person's truth cannot be true for somebody else, and it's not for me to say no, that's not true, because
Yeah.
it's true for them.
Yeah.
And just open up my mind to different ideas, different ways of being in the world, which both invites me to respect others, but then and really just to respect myself,
Yeah.
and just my ideas can be my own.
Hmm.
I don't have to look for someone else's approval. I don't have to look for someone else's affirmation to understand that I am real and true and right
Yeah.
in my own ways. And so I don't know, I guess that's something that I've learned from
Yeah. That's such a mature way to be in faith, I think. I think as young people, we sometimes feel like we're imprisoned by a traditional religion or these ideas that are put upon us. And once you realize that you can grow within that faith, within that tradition, be a part of something bigger than yourself, but then also completely be your own spiritual leader at the same time, that's such a sophisticated way to approach faith. I think that's beautiful.
and the idea of that happening in a hospital setting, it's so unique because so many times it's only in people's darkest, most tragic, physically painful moments they're
Hmm.
also open enough to seeing their most difficult emotional moments.
Yeah, I
And,
bet.
and so when someone is physically compromised, you might say physically like decomposed,
Yeah.
I shouldn't say decomposed, deconstructed, I
Yeah.
suppose. When they're deconstructing also all their other ideas, people who need to shift and think and transition and say, wait, I was taught this my whole life. My parents told me this. My pastor told me this. I got this idea from this one friend. I thought things were like this.
Yeah.
But now, in this moment of pain, I'm realizing I've been put in a new perspective where you can start to shift and say, wait a minute, none of that is true for me. I now
Hmm.
think this other way. I
Right.
now have this new way of being, new values that have occurred that
Mhm.
never would have been open to them if they hadn't been in the hospital. If they
Yeah.
hadn't had the time to literally be laying on their backs, staring at the ceiling, contemplating life. Uh, And so a lot of times I'm called into the room and a person says to me, like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about this before. They've
Hmm.
never had time to think about it before.
Yeah.
They've never been hurt enough or they wanted to think about it before.
Right.
Um, when we're healthy and living our own life, sometimes it is really easy to dismiss thinking about death.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Uh, I think that's actually one of the lines in the Barbie movie that we're going to go
Are you
see.
serious?
They're playing it's in one of the Barbie trailers, and all the Barbies are dancing together, and she just
Uh-huh.
goes, hey, do you guys ever think about dying? The Barbies just like stand still, right? And I think that's one of the things where we think of children as like just being so joyful and happy, but like why is it such a shock, and why is it they use it as a humorous moment in the movie to think
Hmm.
these Barbies would be all of a sudden having these like existential ideas. Like,
Yeah.
oh wait, maybe there's more to life than just do my shoes match my skirt.
Right.
Like, have you ever thought about this before? And it opens up these whole ideas. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe the Barbie movie is more of a, theological, spiritual interlude than I expected.
I would like to think so. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds, and it's funny that you have this moment on a regular basis with people. But it's a very serious thing, and sometimes it takes a lot more. But so it's interesting they bring that up. But speaking of not thinking about it, I wanted to touch on that there's that cultural diversity that you said shows up in the hospital just among the different patients, right? But I think, and of course, like grief, loss, death, all of these are universal things that you'd think we would be thinking about a little bit more or see more. And I think in some traditions we do. Like we do see, or maybe other people see death more than, say, Westerners do or Americans do. It's not as visible here for us, at least. There are some middle-aged people who've never seen a dying body.
Mhm.
So how do you think that embracing these discussions, or how can this maybe shift where we can appreciate or see or be more a part of the process of being like aware of death? I know it's like a Buddhist practice to think about death, contemplate death every day without it being a bad thing or a morbid thing. How do you think that people can do that?
Yeah, I think it's true what you're saying. And I've noticed this in my work here, since I do have the opportunity to work alongside people with such diverse um, cultural needs, cultural expectations.
Hmm.
And I think here it's a very Americanized idea to go live, succeed, get stuff, accumulate,
Hmm.
become better, quote unquote, better
Right.
financially, that we dismiss the ideas of um, failing, or just dismiss the entire idea of like not being,
Right.
to the
Hmm.
point where we even raise our children, I think, in a culture where children aren't introduced to the idea of death. And that when it does come up, it can be such an unreal shock
Yeah.
that a child doesn't necessarily even know what to do with it. A lot of my work, I feel, in chaplaincy is normalizing conversations about death, conversations about dying, that death and dying are not bad things. They
Right.
are naturally occurring events that
Hmm.
sometimes happen at, I might joke and say, at very inconvenient times, right?
Hmm.
I've heard people say, oh, there's going to be a memorial, but people have said, but it's not appropriate to bring the kids because there might be an open casket. Or, oh, at the hospital, are kids allowed to see um, a dead person, or to see
Hmm.
someone who has tubes in their mouth? Constantly people that I work with say, oh no, I don't want to see my loved one because I'll remember them in this horrible situation, as if it will somehow erase all of the other good memories that they have of that person.
Right.
And my personal views on this, many people may disagree with me, but I believe that having kids be a part of memorials, having kids be a part of funerals, is a healthy and normal part of their life. And saying,
Yeah.
yep, grandma died. There's her body, or here's her ashes, or and
Mhm.
talking about it afterwards. When I'm caring for, I can share that just the other day I was caring for a family who had, I think they had 5 kids, and their oldest brother had died in a car accident. And the mom invited me to come in and talk with all the kids at the bedside, just how to be spending time with him that day, but then how to keep remembering him the next week and after the funeral and going on. I think the idea of holding life and death as just not contrary to who we are.
Yeah.
If you're born, you are going to die.
Yeah. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. So in that polarity, like they might be opposites, but they're not, you can't divide one side of a coin from another, right?
It's not a it's not something to be swept under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
to say, oh, this person died and now we're never going to talk about them again.
Right. It's not
Um,
good for us as
no,
communities. Yeah.
well, and that healing, and I think that's part of just not just grief and death, but going into all these other um, human emotions. I think it's partly human nature to try to avoid things that make us feel bad.
Yeah.
But what we end up doing with each other a lot of the time is, because someone else's emotions are making us feel badly, we try to dismiss them. We try to change the conversation. We'll be driving over to a friend's house and you'll whisper, now remember, their brother just died. Don't mention his name because it might upset them.
Right.
I guarantee you that person knows that their brother died and does not want you to dismiss his memory.
Yeah.
My encouragement when somebody is at the bedside with a loved one who's dying, talk about the other experiences in your family.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it can feel so isolating if you're the person who is dealing with that in your heart, and yet you're around all these people who are trying to, pretend it didn't happen. That can be a really lonely situation, I would
It
assume.
feels not only dismissive, but it's also disorienting. And I think it's even dishonoring to the person who did die.
Yeah.
Just, we're not going to raise your memory anymore. We're not going to talk about you because it might be uncomfortable for other people.
Mhm.
When I'm at a bedside with somebody and they'll talk about, oh, and this person also died, and this person, I had this other memory, this is my other experience of death, this is my other experience of this.
Mhm.
And if I can bring all of that into the conversation, bring back all of the feelings, lift them all up so that
Mhm.
they can all be felt and incorporated and reflected upon, that is where whatever given experience you're in a certain moment, if you can take that current experience and connect it to other experiences you've already had,
Mhm.
that is where you're able to create meaning making
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and then move forward. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things that happen where people are in a certain situation, they dismiss the things that have already happened in the past. They dismiss their feelings, they dismiss their emotions, they say we're not going to look at them.
Mhm.
They think they're moving forward that way. But what
Mhm.
they're actually doing is getting stuck in the current moment
Yeah.
because they haven't healed that and they
Right.
can't move forward.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like I know I've had some struggles myself with depression in the past, and I've been on antidepressants in the past, and luckily I don't need to use them anymore, and they can work wonders for sure, and they can get you through a moment. But one of the bad things about it, I think, was the numbing of feelings, and so it's like you may be having to deal with some bad or depressing moments, and sometimes medication can make you feel like you're okay. But yeah, somewhere in your spirit, you're like, wait a minute, there's something to be worked out. And you're right, you can just get stuck in that place. So, just with that in mind, trying to avoid bad feelings or maybe dark times for those who are struggling with finding joy. Do you have any, because I'm sure that you deal with this a lot in your work, just mental health in general, whether there's a tragedy or not? What are some of your kind of go-tos in terms of getting people to see joy in life or kind of to come back to the sunnier side?
Yeah, that's such a real thing and has been a real thing in my life. I too definitely have experience with incorporating some medications into
Mhm.
my care practices that have helped me during different seasons of my life when I've had
Mhm.
different needs. And that question about people who are saying, I'm trying to find joy, or I don't feel joyful, I don't feel happy, I don't feel
Mhm.
satisfied. What I see people doing, um, both in the hospital during a difficult traumatic situation, but what I see people doing just in life, and I see in my own children, I see in my own friendship groups, I see in my own church, is people seeking things and ways that will bring satisfaction to their life. And I've definitely done this too. I've thought, like, oh, if I only can accomplish this task, then I will feel successful. I'll get sucked into the, oh, that one pair of shoes. Oh, if I had that pair of shoes, I would be delighted and everything would be better.
Mm-hmm.
I've lied to myself. Oh, if I would just lose those 15 pounds, then I would be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be completely happy. And so, this idea of people seeking joy, looking for joy, striving for joy, that I think is the wrong way to go about
Mm-hmm.
receiving joy. To me, is not joy and happiness and fulfillment aren't things you can go out and get,
Right.
but the things that are already around you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's more of a practice of relinquishing the striving and actually like stop trying to be joyful and look at the joy that is already there.
Yeah.
And I mean, if somebody says this to me while I'm in the state of my deepest grief, I probably want to punch them in the face. Like, I'm not,
Yeah.
oh, right. So just like sit here and stare at the wall and then
Right.
joy will come to me. But those ideas of giving up things, again, part of my personal theology is if you get rid of the things that you don't need, get rid of the things that aren't helpful, you'll be left with more room inside of yourself.
Yeah.
Accept the things that are joyful, right? And
That's
that's
so
part of those
true.
ideas of the pains related to forgiveness. A lot of the time we need to forgive, we need to let go of something that's happened in our past, not to dismiss that something bad happened, not to say, oh, it's okay to the other person. Forgiveness isn't for them. The
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness is for you to say, you know what, it's no longer helpful to me if I hold on to this grudge, if I hold on to this thing that's taking up so much space within my heart, soul, and
Mm-hmm.
mind. If I can let it go, what else will be available inside of me?
That reminds me of like a home management trick that I just learned. I should have learned it earlier, but like when you're going to get groceries, get new groceries, and your fridge is filled with things that either are too old or you don't want anymore, no one's going to eat them, but it looks full and your cabinets look full, but they're not really. Because so if you take everything out that you're not going to eat, if you're like honest with yourself, same with your closet, if you take stuff out that you're not going to wear, then you realize, okay, I do need to go shopping. I do need, but if you just keep all that crap in there, you think that you're filled up. Like, so it reminds me of what you're saying. Like, you think you're filled up inside. So you won't know until you get rid of it. And then you'll know, oh, this is what I have. I can see everything now.
If you're filled up, either your house or your refrigerator or your mind, your heart
Mm-hmm.
is filled up with things that aren't nourishing,
Mm-hmm.
filled up with things that are not good for you,
Yeah.
filled up with things and thoughts and
Yeah.
burdens that are no longer serving you well.
Yeah.
They need to be um, gently and lovingly gotten rid of
Yeah.
to open up new space.
Marie Kondo it. Marie Kondo.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do.
Tidy up your soul.
Is this grudge I'm holding for my brother? I don't have a brother, so it's a good example. My
Yeah.
grudge I'm holding for my brother, is this serving me well? Is this bringing me joy? Probably not.
Right.
And so find a therapist, take some medications if you need to for a season, find a
Mm-hmm.
friend, talk it out, find a way to heal the things that are hurting. This question about how can people find joy
Mm-hmm.
is by actually turning to their deepest griefs.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds backwards, but how do you seek celebration? Well, you seek celebration by attending to your pain, attending to your fear, and going back and looking it in the face and making friends with all the parts of yourself that are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, I see you and I love you and you're driving me nuts, but you are part of who I am down deep inside. And
Mm-hmm.
by nurturing those difficult parts of ourselves, that is actually bringing us closer and closer to the most positive, fruitful, joyful versions of ourselves. And I think really that is the entire purpose of why we're here on earth in the first place, is to
Mm-hmm.
constantly be moving towards being
Mm-hmm.
the fullest, most joyful, most exuberant, and lively versions of ourselves we can possibly be.
Yeah, and I like that idea of there is vitality and vibrance. It may not be happiness, but there's vibrance in embracing all of those parts, the whole spectrum of the human experience, and which is where lifiness even comes from. I don't want to use the word happiness. I don't even want to use the word joy necessarily, because that's just one part. But if we can like embrace all of it and face it, it reminds me also of the idea of in a nightmare, if you face the monster, if you run, and like when you're having a nightmare at night, if you run away from it, it will be really scary. But if you like turn around and you look at it, it will probably have like some ridiculous like donkey face or something and it will disappear.
Yeah.
It's like a real life practice of just turning around and facing the monster and looking at it and sitting down with it and being like, wait, why are you chasing me? Let's talk about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is reminding me too of these ideas in clinical work, where as a chaplain I work with people to have conversations with their disenfranchised grief, if
Mm-hmm.
that's an idea that you're familiar with. So many of us carry around things that have happened to us all throughout our childhoods. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to when you were 4 or 8 or 12, or pick some big moment where something happened to you, but yet because of your situation, whoever, maybe it was your parents, maybe it was your teacher, maybe it was people in your neighborhood, whoever, you weren't allowed, or it wasn't expected for you to talk about that thing, the moment, that big life-changing moment. And what so many of us do is go through our entire adult lives carrying around griefs from our childhoods. We've
Yeah.
never had an opportunity to face and to hold and to look at and nurture. They've never been healed. And so we've put these griefs underneath the rug, swept under the rug. And
Mm-hmm.
50 years later in life, we're still tripping over this lump under the carpet. And
Mm-hmm.
we're like, what is that smell? What is
Right.
something? And it's like, oh, it's this thing that's been festering like a lump under my feet my entire life. And I've been trying to avoid it. And I tell you, it is time to lift up that rug, take it out. It's going to be nasty by now,
Yeah.
but sweep it out, put on some gloves if you need to, and clean it out. And then eventually you'll be able to walk without tripping again.
Or yeah, or even I like the idea of like inviting that self to the table, like whatever that 13-year-old self or 5-year-old self, whatever was traumatized or hurt at the time, like invite them out because you've pushed that version of yourself away because it didn't serve you. Invite them to the table and have a conversation. So rather than treating it like a bad thing or an evil thing or a festering thing, maybe it's festering, but like invite it to the table and help it get better.
Absolutely. I'm pretty big into the idea of internal family systems theory. And
Mm-hmm.
the nutshell idea of that is the theory that each person has a core self, which I relate to my God image as a human being created in the image of God, the Imago Dei.
Mm-hmm.
From that core self, you have other parts. So this is the internal family systems theory, that there's parts of ourselves. And so there's parts of ourselves that we admire, parts of ourselves that we don't like, parts of ourselves that annoy us. But that all of those parts have been developed as either protectors or
Mm-hmm.
pieces that are reacting to something else that's happened in our life. And so,
Yeah.
what you're saying, by inviting all those parts of yourself to the table,
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation with all of them,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, I'm glad you're here. You're treating me really well today. You're not helping me out anymore. You
Mm-hmm.
used to be a helpful part of myself, but I've grown
Yeah.
out of you. And have a talk with that part of yourself and
Right.
say, you think I'm still 4 years old. I'm actually 47 now.
Right.
And I got this, so you can go away, and dissolving that part and
Yeah.
turning it into something else that can serve you better.
That sounds like alchemy. I love that. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, spiritual care work is a lot about being intentional about what you're embracing and encouraging other people to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any, and I know I didn't officially get this question out to you, but if you have any resources that I can share with listeners that we can put in the show notes, maybe talks or books that would help them through their own struggles, and if they're facing grief or facing traumatic experiences, the same that you walk your patients through, that would be wonderful. We could put those in the notes.
I'll forward you some of that. I mean, I have a cajillion of things that like come to the top of my mind. So yeah, I'll send you just a few that I think might be helpful.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks for being on the show.